I'm ready.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you for the second class on Exodus. Would you pray for us, Rabbi?
The blessing over study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for providing us texts of meaning and encouraging us to delve into them. Amen.
Make sure your microphone's on.
Yes, okay.
So, last week, the beginning of Exodus was setting the context. And so we have continuation of the Genesis story, this family, what later becomes, or the Israelites, Hebrews, later the Jews, goes to Egypt. And it says how they get there. They rest in the land, and Joseph, the continuation of the patriarchs, interprets dreams, so he becomes the second command to Pharaoh, and they're blessed, all the people. But then all that stuff dies. The Pharaoh dies, Joseph dies, and Pharaoh, the new king, is worried that there are going to be too many of these foreigners in our land. So the story is set up that you have ragtag group of foreigners loosely associated versus the giant empire of Egypt, the most powerful in the known world. And it's Pharaoh, the king, versus, we don't even know yet, some guy. And ultimately it's about the might of Egypt and their gods, which are the preeminent gods of everywhere, versus, and they're from an area, Egypt, or of things, animals or fertility or whatever. And then this God, Yahweh, the God later of the Israelites, who's not God of a particular place, but of a people. And those two things are about to clash. And it ends the story there in chapter 1. And then you get a hero arises in the midst of all that. And that hero's name is Luke Skywalker, right? No. Very similar story. If you didn't know, George Lucas borrowed from a guy named Joseph Campbell who wrote about archetypes. It's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And so the story of Moses is in fact similar to Luke Skywalker and a bunch of other classic images of archetypes because it tends to follow a pattern of sorts to go from here to here to here in all these different encounters. So today we encounter Moses. Aaron?
Okay. Any questions or thoughts so far? Or that you want to share about Exodus? Okay, so in chapter 2, which you should have in front of you if you picked it up on the way in, yes? Everyone has 2? We are introduced to Moses. And Moses is one of these figures from history, from literature, about whom we may imagine we know more than is actually on the page or given to us, because sort of a hagiography grows up around this particular character, who's born under a death sign. That is to say, he's born at a time when all Jewish male babies are to be killed, to be drowned, or snuffed out. He's not. And then we know a little bit, and you'll find it here. What else do we know, or do you recall about Moses? You have a sense of anything about his biography? Yes, please. Right, so he's adopted into the Pharaoh's home. Pharaoh's daughter finds him in the river, takes him into her home. Okay, good. Anything else? So, you all know the great man theory of history, the idea that someone of accomplishment as an adult surely evinced these qualities as a child, such that we could imagine we wouldn't have known this person would go on to accomplish this, that, or the other, or to become the leader of whatever it may be, but we go back and imagine. If you recall, when we first began this series of priest and rabbi classes, we looked at the parables of Jesus, and I'll share with you again, as I did with John when we started, I had imagined, knowing nothing about the parables until preparing for that class, that the parables of Jesus were stories of a young Jesus, like the parable of George Washington and the cherry tree gives us insight into the character, what we want to project onto George Washington. I imagined that the parables were giving us that of a little boy Jesus. Couldn't be further from the reality, right? Jesus may appear, tells these parables to talk about the kingdom of God and other things. In much the same way, we might imagine that Moses was always this daring, dashing, heroic figure, but we get the briefest of insights into what his infancy or being a toddler or his adolescence was, and then we project and build from there. Yes? Does that make sense? So what do we know in this first couple of verses?
Can we read?
Should we read it? Please.
Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him, plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, Moses' sister, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water."
Let's stop there. So what do we learn about Moses in that moment? What little bit do we learn that gives us some insight? The language is really terse. If you look at verses 9 and 10, it speaks of his relationship to his own mother, or that which she conveyed to him as she's nursing him. And it's been a rich mine of midrashic discovery. That is to say, you may remember that midrash is the process of sort of plumbing the text for meaning or explicating something from the text, drawing it forth. What's that?
Fan fiction's a great
Fan fiction,
yeah.
Right? Sort of writing the backstory or writing the ideas that it provides. And so what do we get in verse 9 and 10 about Moses and what he gains, if you will, or what he comes to learn about himself or the world around him from that which takes place between his mother and himself? You see that? What do we know about what happened? It's very terse. Michael? Okay, Michael mentioned that there's a matrilineal hint here, right? That is passed through the mother, right? What does it say? It says.
Turn to your right.
Oh, I'm sorry, please, Daniel. He's growing up in privilege. He's a Jewish boy, baby boy, who isn't going to become a slave, but rather is going to grow up in the Pharaoh's house. That's good. In verse 9, here's what we read. So the woman, Moses' mother, do you know her name? This is like a Final Jeopardy. So the answer is, who was Yocheved? Yocheved is her name, and his father's Amram. But we don't learn that till later. But his mother takes the child and nurses him. And when the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter. Right. So what happens in that verse? The rabbis ask, so what is it to nurse a child? Such that when he grows up, he then goes into the world. What is it that's going on there? Yes, it's breastfeeding, okay. But what else is being transmitted with mother's milk? Or what else is being impressed upon Moses, such that in the next verse, when he goes out and sees an Egyptian beating a slave, he knows that it's his kinsman. Right? I don't want to be too quick to move past this idea. What do you imagine if we were sitting around and there's a class on homiletics? We're encouraging you to figure out what creatively you can do by way of making a sermon out of this. What might we suggest? A parent, a mother, a father imparts to their child when they're very young, such that they now know who they are in the world, or at least they have an inkling of where they come from or what's expected. What might you imagine is going on in verses 9 and 10 there? Because the story of Moses is, as Daniel suggests, is that he grows up, and we have the session here too, is that he grows up in two worlds. That's often the felt experience, if not the lived experience, of Jews ever since. That we live between two worlds. We're of this group and there's a wider world, or there are expectations within the particularity of the religious community, and there's a much wider world that brings different expectations or prejudices or biases or whatever else the outside world might bring, beyond your family circle or beyond the community of like-minded folks with whom you fraternize, whether that's a politically like-minded group or a religiously like-minded group, that Moses becomes the paradigm or the example of how one might remain true to their own group even as they're living in Pharaoh's court, or even as, yes, please.
What makes Moses exempt? So it seems as though everyone knows that Moses is a Hebrew. And with the edict that all, Jewish families must be taken care of, why is it that he's allowed to live in these two different worlds?
Great question.
According to the text, it's not passive as what African Americans can
Yes.
have that type of experience. From the movie, it seems as though he was passive and no one knew who he was.
Right.
But with our text here, it's strongly implied that everyone knew
Okay, good. Let me restate the comment, the question. The question was initially, what made Moses exempt such that he wasn't put to death, right? And how widely known is it that what was he passing, a Jew passing as an Egyptian, as it were? Is it public common knowledge that he's the adopted son from this oppressed group, or is he not? Are folks not aware until such time as a little bit later in this chapter that Moses strikes the Egyptian, kills him, buries him in the desert? It's observed by others. It's mentioned to him. He gets frightened. He runs away. How much of his identity is actually known? Is part of the question? Yes. Do you have thoughts? Yes.
Second question, how dangerous was it for his mother to raise him as a Jew? Knowing he was going to be adopted and how he was growing up.
How safe was it for Moses' mother Yocheved to raise him as a Jew, given the world they live in? I don't have a definitive answer for this, right? These are the kinds of questions, please. He was raised as Pharaoh's son. Yes, okay. That's what the text tells us, right? That he grew up in the Pharaoh's house.
That's why I was wondering if he was older, when the child grew up, how old would he have been then?
Excellent. So when the verse says, and when he grew up, at such time as it was appropriate, or when he was ready, or no longer a child, or at what age is that? So some have suggested that a nursling is between 2 and 5 years old, and maybe he's 5, and that idea. Maybe that works. We have just this briefest of economy of words, right? What does it mean in point of fact when you are now old enough, or when you grew up? A similar question arises in Genesis when Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac. How old was Isaac? He put up no fight, no resistance. It suggests he's a small child, perhaps. Other commentators suggest that, in point of fact, he was an adult. And so we don't readily know. This would give rise to a place where you could insert some fan fiction or some midrash or a sermon about what, in fact, it does mean to either pass as someone who others imagine you are, and you don't disabuse them of what they assume about you, whether it's your ethnicity or your politics or whatever it is. I'll just keep my mouth shut. I won't call any attention to myself, and I'll be just fine. I'll be able to move within the world or get through this dinner party or whatever else it might be, right? I'm not going to let on that I don't agree or I'm not of the same mind as you. Or Maybe he is. There was a yes. Oh, Allison first. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Where does Aaron fit in? I've been asking that for years.
Later, he shows up.
Right. Here and then here. Okay.
Concept is how formed was the Jewish faith when Moses was growing up? A tribe, a handful of people brought from somewhere else to work.
Great question.
It's a great question. So the question is, how fully formed or well developed was Judaism, yes, such that that was what was imparted to Moses? And the answer is probably not a whole lot. We don't yet have the Torah or the Ten Commandments. We're not there quite yet, right? We know that I'll get you in a second. In Genesis, some of the characters engage in behaviors, things like eating milk and meat together, for instance, or serving that to guests, that obviously evince no knowledge of the laws of keeping kosher, which were going to be provided in Leviticus, not there yet, as we're still in Exodus, right? Or say nothing of Genesis. And even more, it's going to be then expanded and codified in the Talmudic period, which is more contemporaneous with Jesus, the 1st and 2nd centuries and the rest. So it's not that Moses would have been schooled in the particulars of Judaism as a religion or a philosophy or a set of laws and expectations, but there is a clear sense that this was a community that had its own allegiances and traditions and whatever it was that defined that group of folks, the Hebrews for our purposes, and certainly in contradistinction to the Egyptian world, it would have been clear that they were other.
Think of how you would, if you adopted a child into your family, how would you communicate to him or her who your new family is? You would probably tell stories, and you would probably talk about both significant people and events. We come from this place. This hardship was awful, but it made us learn these things. This person demonstrated a value of who we are as a family. As Aaron said, the rabbinic sources say between 2 and 5 years old is how long he would have been there. So if you think at 2 and 5, is he talking? Yes. Is he being able to have basic conversations? Yes. Do you get full Judaism? No. But you do get, because we know later in the story, at least this much, you learn who Abraham, Isaac, Jacob are, who Joseph is, who the various wives are. You learn that somebody called them out from some other place to be a covenant people. It's not all there yet, but the very nascent character of it is. So where you come from is a faraway place. We're not Egyptian. We're from back there. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, and then Joseph was the one that came here. And Joseph, he was the number 2 guy in the whole kingdom. I guarantee you that's part of the story. And now we're not one real group of people yet. We're a disparate group, and the Exodus is what makes them a people. So some version, I would strongly argue, that's what his mother is giving. This is who you are and who you people are. Now you're going to go live, you're going to go off to boarding school, and they're going to teach you all these crazy things. That's fine, you need to learn that world too, but don't ever forget where you come from. Because it's this weird, he's as Aaron said, he's not really fully either Jewish or Egyptian. And I think that's an important part of the story. It strongly suggests to me, by the context, everybody knew that he was a Hebrew boy. And everybody also knew that Hebrew boy was living in Pharaoh's house. So he didn't have to go through all the same stuff we did. He got better food. He didn't have to work. He's not a slave. Look at the clothes he wears. Look at the people he hangs out with. That jerk. So he's not really a Hebrew. And I guarantee you the Egyptians are like, yeah, he hangs out with us, but look at him. He's one of those people. They look down on him. So he's not fully Hebrew or included in the group, and he's not fully Egyptian. Think about emotionally how you would have to deal with that. You're not included in either group, and everybody makes sure you know you're not part of our gang. It's awful. And yet, who's
Right here first, please.
Margaret?
Yes.
And they say, we're going to go find this kid's mother. How do they know who the mother was? But did she really take him home, or did she just take him to the nursery in the Pharaoh's house? So he lived in the nursery with all the other children and all the other wives, whoever was there. And he didn't really go.
Okay. So the first question, if I heard you correctly, was how did they find Moses' mother? And the answer is, what's that? Well, according to the story,
It's very clever to show how smart the Hebrews are and how dumb the Egyptians are. Like last time I talked about the burn, that all the Hebrew women are so vigorous, they have the kid before we can get there and then go back to work. But all those Egyptian cows, like they have a baby and it takes forever. The Hebrew women are vigorous. This is so clever. So notice the baby is not thrown in the water in an ark. And what's the Hebrew word for ark?
Teva.
Teva. Is it the same word as Noah's ark?
Exact same word.
Same one. So the deliverance thing. And by the way, nave, which is where the people sit, is the word like navy. It's an upside down ship or ark. That's the old way. Anyway, he's put in the ark. It's with bitumen, which is from the Dead Sea. It's like an oil, black, greasy product to bind it, make it waterproof. In the movies, or other things I've seen, she just puts him out on the water and he floats away. That's not what the text says. She puts him amidst the reeds. This is partly chance, but it's also a very well-prepared operation. So she puts him in the reeds, where he's not likely to float away. Because it's waterproof, he's not going to sink and drown. Apparently there's a cover on it, and probably the baby's making noise. And what's that down there by the river? What's the last place you would also hide, or the best place to hide a baby if they're all supposed to be thrown in the river and drowned? You put it at the river. Nobody's going to go look for a baby there. How long did Moses' mother keep him, by the way? 3 months, until he's like too squirmy and loud. Then he goes in the basket, and there wasn't, again, left to chance. Moses' sister, whose later name we learn is Miriam, about 7 years older, so say 7-year-old, old enough to be clever, hides in the reeds, and then when she sees, oh, hello, I'm a cute little girl. And this baby is discovered, and oh my, it's a baby. It must be a Hebrew baby. What should we do? I know a nursemaid, a wet nurse that could nurse it for you. That's a great idea, little girl. I was like, think of, again, if this were a movie, well, can you just go get somebody? Yeah, I got the perfect person for it. So she goes home and tells her mother, Moses' mother, hey, and think of how awesome it is. Pharaoh's daughter is going to pay you to raise and nurse your own baby. It's so fantastic. The upstart ragtag Jews, or Hebrews, get one over on these Pharaoh's daughter. So we get one of our own people in their house, and they're paying us to do it, and he survives. And so Miriam, was it known that Pharaoh's daughter would be there? Nothing suggests that. There is an element of danger, suspense, surprise, but they're trying to hedge their bets and participate in this. And then, so that's Miriam, sets this up, and then the story goes from there. So a little girl, you could say, affects God's will. The Jews, Hebrews, get one over on the Egyptians, and now Moses is in the household between those two worlds. So that's how all those things happen. I just think that's fantastic writing, to be able to get him into those places. What does the name Moses mean? Is it our names in the Hebrew Bible? Nothing is by accident. It's a descriptive term. You remember? In Egyptian, it means one drawn out of the water. So he's the one drawn out, like Hebrew's Egyptian daughter would pull him out of the water. What else does it mean?
I mean, helper, redeemer. The idea that Moses is going to be the rescuer for the people, right?
So both languages, both cultures, the one drawn out or the savior, the redeemer, the rescuer.
So in answer to your question, we don't know whether for 2 to 5 years Moses lived with his birth family, as it were, or whether Yocheved, his mother, would every day go to the Pharaonic court and there nurse him or raise him. And at a certain point, to bring him to Pharaoh's daughter might just be to turn him over. We don't have a sense of that, right? But that's where you can come in with the midrash. How, in point of fact, do you impact a child? What does it mean to say the hand that rocks the cradle rocks the world? Right? We know that these are powerful things that we imbibe early that get imprinted upon our brains and our psyches as to who we are, what's meaningful, what's important, what language we hear, what we're exposed to. And so Moses grows up with an awareness of who his people are, and he's growing up in an environment that's not typical for his people. He lives in two worlds, or moves between these two worlds with whatever degree of ease or familiarity, and then the worlds collide, essentially, where he has to choose a side, basically. Yeah?
Yeah, great point.
Other thoughts or questions about what you might suggest in terms of what's going on? Yes?
Does Moses know that that woman is his mother, or does she pretend that she's not?
You tell me. Does Moses know? Is Moses aware that this is his mother? I don't know, right? We've seen these videos of little ducklings following whoever's in the front. It doesn't necessarily mean it's their mother who's the duck, right? That Moses is influenced by this, right? We don't quite know. There was another hand, yeah.
Flashing on the New Testament where Jesus is like unknown, a normal kid, probably raised to be a rabbi and not behaving like anybody else until.
So you're seeing there's a parallel for you between the story of Moses and the story of Jesus. Excellent.
Well, one is you get some type of Moses, Jesus. With Jesus, you get in a couple Gospels some type of infancy narrative, the birth, and then in another one you'll get, well, when he's 12, he reads reads the scroll from the prophet, and then that's it. It skips. And he disappears, and his parents get mad at him. It's not till he's an adult. Effectively, you get a similar idea here with Moses. There's an infant, and then it skips all the way to the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, where he calls his disciples. And with Moses, it starts with, I'm in two worlds, and I've got to make a decision to which do I belong. I'm going this way or that way. So all the stuff that happened may be very interesting, but not to the author, because he's getting Moses into these two worlds, and then he's got to have Moses decide, are you going to be an Egyptian or are you going to be a Hebrew? Choose this day whom you will serve. That's a different book, but
No, it's great.
you got to pick which one.
Great.
Question.
What do you make of the fact that in Jewish tradition or in rabbinic tradition, the fact that a word appears in two different places, that the basket and the ark, the basket of Moses, the ark, Noah's ark, are the same word, suggests an opportunity to draw a connection between them. That's how the midrashic mind works. So what might you say if you were going to kick off the sermon or open the discussion? What are the parallels that you might recognize between that which contained Moses and that which contained Noah and his family and two of every animal? Yes.
All the other Hebrew babies were killed, Moses wasn't.
Yes.
All the other animals were killed, one of those.
Excellent. So while Moses is in this basket, all the other baby boys born to Jewish mothers are killed. While Noah and his family on the ark, all the other people not on the ark also meet their end, right? A watery death, as it were. Yes, there's that, which tells us what about the container within which Moses survives and Noah survives? Protected by God? Okay. That it's in this vessel that the future is promised. Or it's through this vessel, whatever that might be. Right? Now let's move beyond just sort of the physical. What is it that we ascribe, any one of us, we don't have to have a collective consensus, that any one of us understands as, if not for this, I might not have survived it. Or it's within this, whether it's in your family, this congregation, your faith, if not for fill in the blank, I might not have survived this, or the future would not be, as a result, assured. That's an opportunity, right? Is to think about what this teva suggests. The story goes back and forth in terms of sort of like a telescope, which lens, whether you look at the large end or the small end, with regard to the particularities of this Levite man and this Levite woman, between Moses in contradistinction to all the other Jewish babies. Are you familiar with the term particularism and universalism? We spoke about this? No, I don't think so. In religious traditions, there are particularistic concerns and universal concerns. Universal concerns we'll start with first are those that apply to everybody, such as everyone's created in the image of God. Our understanding of that, we universalize, right? That everybody, such that we get some insight into what we owe each other or what we're entitled to simply because we're a human being in the image of God. It's been suggested that because if everyone's in the image of God, then everyone is of unique, inestimable, and equal worth. And we have that as part of our Western tradition, whether we draw it from the religious sources or from other political documents. The idea is that every human being is the same. That's universal. Honor your mother and father. That's a universal commandment. Thou shalt not kill. That's a universal notion. But keep the Sabbath day is particular. Or the dietary expectations, whether they're the commandments about keeping kosher or whether they are what this religious community does at certain times of the year by way of dressing up the church or thinking about the concerns that are provided to you through your religious tradition. Then across the street, they don't have that tradition. They have a different tradition. That's particularity or particularism. Make sense? All right, so religions have these all the time. We find them everywhere. And in point of fact, that's essentially one of the tensions that exists for Moses. He's a Jewish boy, and he lives in this larger world. Yes? And in much the same way, we telescope between Moses' identity as a Hebrew, or passing within the court, that which is unique to him, and his understanding, which he grows into, that we have a responsibility that's much larger. It's not just about me. These are my people, or these are the concerns.
Why does it call, it's very clear early in the story, talking about his parents as a Levite man and woman. Why Levites? Why does that matter?
The Levites were the priestly class. So he's born into a priestly family.
So Levi, as I recall, was the daughter of Keturah, the second wife
of Abraham.
Of Abraham. And so they had 6 kids, and those are 6 tribes. So it's legitimacy of that genealogy, and that is also the priestly class. So he comes from that. That's about the particularity stuff they want you to know.
Yep.
Shall I read the next part?
Please, sure.
One day after Moses had grown up, so skip from infant to grown up, he went out to his people, and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. So if you didn't get it the first time, he's siding with the Hebrews. He looked this way and that. You all know what that's like. No one is looking at me. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian, and he hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and he said to the one who was in the wrong, "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew?" In the most self-righteous tone he could muster. "Why do you strike your fellow Hebrew? I am now the authority to decide this." And the man answered, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us, you jerk?" Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known. Oh, I guess somebody saw me do it." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. So he's all fine to ignore him, but you killed an Egyptian, you're out for good. And Moses is afraid. So he is in very quickly, I'm not really in either world, not accepted. I am kicked out of everywhere. Not banished, they're going to kill me if I don't run away. That's in one paragraph that happens. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian, which is modern-day Saudi Arabia, approximately 700 miles from where they were in Egypt. So pretty far away. Not even, there's no interstates. You got to ride a camel or walk. It's a very far away. But Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense of these 7 girls, "Go away, horrible shepherds," and watered their flock to help them. When they returned to their father Reuel, what's the other name for him? Reuel? I can't remember what it is right now. To their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you come back so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds." Odd, he's identified as an Egyptian. Jethro. Jethro is the other name.
Yes.
An Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water out and watered the flock. He said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave this man? I got 7 of you and need to marry you off. And here's a guy who can, take care of business. I only got 6 left after this." I'm thinking like a dad. "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to eat with us." Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son and named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien residing." Gershom means a stranger here. Zipporah means little bird, which I quite like that name, little bird. And his son was, "I was a stranger here," because he was born in this foreign land. After a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God looked upon the Israelites, and God took notice of them. So it went back to the big picture, leaving Moses to the side for a second. Why Midian? What the heck is that? And the priest of Midian? They come from the same people as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So they worship the same God. So these are distant kinsmen, relatives. So they are acceptable because it's all the same God, but not so close. They're, cousin, this is farther than that. But these are kind of our people. And so he goes, he's never had a home. He wasn't fully Hebrew, he wasn't fully Egyptian. He goes 700 miles away to Saudi Arabia and finds a home and a family, gets a father-in-law, a wife, a son, and establishes himself there. And then when he's kind of settled and got his place, God comes knocking. "Oh, I'm happy here, God. I've got everything just like I want it. Nobody's trying to kill me. Got a wife and a kid and got some flocks from my father-in-law." And then we hear more about this in chapter 3.
I'm laughing. I'm remembering, if you remember the movie Zorba the Greek, Zorba is taking the tourists around the island, and he says to him at one point, this is apropos of John's comment about Moses in Midian, asks Zorba whether he has a wife, a family. He goes, "Oh, I got the wife, the kids, the house, the job, the whole catastrophe." That's what he goes. That's Moses. Is very happy, settled in Midian, right? And then his future is gonna come calling. Let me point out, I guess notice this for the first time looking at this. We have a few references to how time passes. So after Moses, when the child grew up, one day after Moses had grown up, Then we get, after a long time, the king of Egypt died. Those are opportunities in the rabbinic imagination to decide, well, so what went on in that window of time? What does it mean to have grown up? Not just to get taller, not just to age, not just to become more physically, clearly a child as opposed to an infant, but what does it mean to say someone grew up, or one day after he'd grown up? I can imagine that there are for each of us, I should think, moments in our own lives when that we identify for ourselves as a moment of decision, or a moment of awareness, or a moment that after that event took place, everything was different thereby, and we think of it as that was then and this is now. Yes? George Lakoff, the linguist from Berkeley, has suggested that when we think, perhaps it's Westerners, but for our purposes, all of us, think about the passage of time in our own lives, we tend to think of it as a linear progression, such that if you were to write your autobiography, you would have various chapters, and this one would deal with the early years, or when we lived in this place, and then that place, and then this happened, and I went away, and I got a job, or I met this person, right? And we think of them as sort of boxcars lined up one after another, moving in a forward direction. Yes? And maybe there are moments that you think, well, when I left my parents' home and I went to school, or when I got married and we bought our own apartment, or our own home, those might be moments. But for most of our lives, we grow up along the way and aren't realizing it quite, that we're coming to understand ourselves or see the world in a certain way. Does that make sense? So we look around and go, whoa, I guess I'm the adult in the room now, or I'm now the oldest person. Remember when you had that awareness, you look around and you're like, yikes, I'm older than everybody else here. How did that happen? Or I've now been working in this place longer than anybody else who's in the room. Sort of, it sneaks up on you all of a sudden. And then there are moments, of course, where you take a big leap forward, or there's a setback, and we think of it in that way. So these are also insights. What went on for Moses? How did he come to know who he was? What was it that was imparted to him? What are the most important parts of your own identity and how you came to understand them? Yes? Question? No. So something, yes, please. There are two big moments in your life: the day you're born,
When you figure out why.
and why you were born. How?
This is Moses' why time. That's fascinating. I think very easily, when I was born into this crazy world, and then why, it may be he's thinking, because I finally got a family and making a life for myself. But very, very quickly, let's see in the next couple of chapters, God has different plans for the why of his life. He's going to encounter God in a burning bush, and you're going to go do this. And he's like, I think I like it here. I like my life. I don't want to do that. But that's the why that he's discovering. A really good point. Yes, sir. Having a son would help you come to a why, but also make a man out of you in the old-fashioned term. He's about to experience all this other stuff where he grows into his identity. And it's also important to say the biblical characters are not like heroes in a lot of Western culture where they, like Superman, to me is a terrible hero because he's basically has one weakness and he's strong and good looking, can do anything he wants. Moses is a completely flawed character. And we get to discover that over and over. I mean, to start, would you, if you were to pick the hero of your group, would you make him not really trustworthy as one of us? And secondly, his first public act is to murder someone. And then his third act is to run away. Oh, that's our big hero savior. That's how the story was written, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. He should have been the one, this would be fan fiction midrash, that jumped in and saved the murder and then made good stuff and then reconciled the Egyptians and Hebrews. No, he's not a great person.
He's flawed,
He's
for sure.
completely flawed. So don't lose sight of that. He's a completely flawed person who is also the deliverer, Savior. Now contrast that, interestingly, at least to me, to Jesus, because there is, we were talking earlier of the parallels, and in that story they killed all the little boys to try to get him, similar to Moses, and it skips from infancy to adulthood, but he is claimed as without sin. So you have a completely flawed person, or not complete, but very flawed person, a normal human being was another way to say that, in Moses, and then Jesus are really different type of figures there.
If I go one step, please.
So, the part God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to me, this is separating Moses and Jesus in a way, and that Jesus seems like, from his conception, it was always his ultimate plan. Whereas it seems like, I don't know how God remember about his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it seems like once he remembered, he's like, okay, I guess I'll use Moses as my deliverer.
The very interesting point, I interpret remember is a nice literary expressive way of recalling the covenant, the promise made. So God remembers, and Moses, the very flawed person, does become that. We as Christians will talk about something called salvation history. So think of, if you've been to church or about to go to church, right to Eucharist, that's briefly retelling salvation history. There's a role of the Jews within that and the role of Jesus within that. And it's different ways of coming about a similar thing, of how God remembers the covenant, the promises, and redeems the Jewish people, saves them, makes them Jews, and then redeems all of creation. So we as Christians are putting those ideas together. And we tell it every single week in the Eucharist.
We should also mention just the relationship of Moses within Jewish tradition is considered the greatest of all prophets, Moses, but come the first, second century where Christianity is gaining a foothold, and we have this idea, this notion that's been introduced that Jesus is without sin and is the Savior. The Jewish community works double time to make sure that no one mistakes Moses for our version of Jesus. That is to say, the Jewish community works overtime, not just to point out that he's a flawed individual, right? But that in point of fact, there's nothing divine about Moses. Because that's a refutation, if you will, or a pushback against this growing church that's coming up where Jesus is divine, right? And they work overtime to make certain that no one mistakes Moses for being divine, that Moses is at the head of the column leading the Hebrews out of Egypt, but it's by God's power that's done it. And Moses, in the traditional Haggadah, the story of the Passover, the story of the Exodus that we tell around the Passover Seder table, in the traditional versions, they've excised Moses from the tale. Maybe we've spoken about that. Not unlike, are you familiar with Thomas Jefferson's Bible? What Thomas Jefferson did with his Bible? Yes? Someone want to just share with us?
Cut out all the miracles.
Cut out all the miracles with like a penknife or an X-Acto knife. Slice out all the miracles, and now we have the ethical, or now we have the historical, but not the supernatural. In much the same way, the rabbis in the 2nd century, creating the Haggadah, the story of the Exodus that we tell at the Passover Seder table, have excised Moses from the story. Lest anyone in the 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th, since now we have Moses back in the tale because it's such a difficult story to tell absent Moses. It would be as if you're telling the story of the Civil War, whatever your thoughts are about the Civil War, but you never mention the 16th president. How do you tell the story of the Civil War without ever mentioning Abraham Lincoln's name? But that's what the rabbis are attempting to do in the 2nd century when they create the Haggadah, the Passover story. They take Moses out so that no one should imagine that Moses is the same as Jesus. Which isn't to give Jesus primacy. It's just to make certain that the Jewish community understands that we don't have that figure. We rely on God and then human agency. We can talk more about that. So the role of Moses.
Margaret? How old was Moses when he's in Midian? he had a long time to redeem himself and figure things out. So Moses, think of these characters are not living to 70-ish. He's much older, and
I have an answer. So by tradition, Moses, if you look at the very end of Deuteronomy, Moses dies at 120 years old. That's the figure that's ascribed to him. If he dies at the end of a 40-year journey at 120, then he was 80 when he led the people, the Hebrews, out of Egypt. So Midian, or rather killing the Egyptians or being in Midian, I don't know, I mean, he was somewhere between when he went out and saw this Egyptian and many years ago, but he's clearly an adult and maybe even a senior citizen at the time. We don't quite know. We have to suspend some disbelief. That's part of the rationale of thinking about, I mentioned Isaac. We imagine Isaac was a young boy when he was taken for sacrifice, because that's essentially how he's portrayed in the story. And yet rabbinic tradition understands that because immediately after that episode, we learn that Sarah dies at 127 years old. So we have another 120 and then an extra 7. We talked about sort of the role of numbers, 40s and 7s and the rest. If she was 127 when she died, and she was 90 when he was born, then that makes Isaac 37. Well, okay, the story takes on a different gloss then. That's not meant to be an authoritative, decisive number that you should rely on, but that's how the tradition has come to understand it. In much the same way as tomorrow evening, the Jewish world is going to celebrate Rosh Hashanah, the creation, which is the birthday or creation of the world, and the conceit is that we're finishing year 5,785 and we'll begin year 5,786, which traditionally is understood as a celebration of essentially when God said, "Let there be light," 5,700 years ago, less than 6,000 years ago. You can take that for what it's worth, right? But that was arrived at by adding up all the various lengths of time. The king reigned for this many years, and this person lived this long, and there were 40 days and 40 nights, and pretty soon you get all the way back to a date, right? How old they were, how long it's been.
old enough to know better.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay, y'all, thank you very much. See you next week.